Hello, my name's Tom Coyle, and I'm a co-producer for the Break It Down show with Pete Turner. It's been a real pleasure being a part of this project and working with Pete, and really excited to be part of this. And I want to thank you, the audience, for being a part of our journey as we are approaching a significant milestone, 1,000 episodes. That is pretty cool. And we have been fortunate to have some incredible guests on the show. We've had folks such as Stuart Copeland, the former drummer of the Police, and we've had thought leaders in business, politics, entertainment, sports. We've had people who are household names and people who are just up and coming but have an exciting message to share. Today I want to talk about somebody very special, Rufus McGaugh. He was my teacher in 6th and 7th grade. And one of the coolest things is this is a guy who's been to every country around the world. If you attend his class, you never read out of a textbook. It's always his slides and sharing articles on the places he's actually been to. And, you know, when I was growing up, my mom always said, man, Rufus should write a book. And well, he has given in, not really given in, but he has provided us with the gift of this book. He's got 2 books out. His first book, Longitude and Latitude with Attitude, One Man's Quest to See the Entire World. His follow-on book is Joyriding with a Terrorist in Yemen and Other Travel Tales. And one thing you're going to know from listening to the podcast or reading his book, he is an amazing storyteller and really brings it home and connects to you. And if you really want to understand the world, just tune in and hear a little bit of what Rufus has to say. The man has some stories. He knows the history. He knows so much about culture. He's a military veteran like both Pete and myself. He served in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. And that inspired him to travel more, see the world, understand the world. And then obviously he committed to being a teacher and molding young minds. And even though he's retired, he is still one of the most sought after substitute teachers. And everyone knows Rufus in our community. And thanks to his book and thanks to this podcast, we really hope that his message really expands. I mean, this guy, he has got a really cool, exciting message. And I can't think of anyone more appropriate to recognize and highlight as we approach this milestone of 1,000 episodes. Thanks for listening, and let's jump in and hear some really cool stories from Rufus.
Hey, this is Jason Piccolo. Welcome to the Break It Down show. Pete and his crew are reaching almost 1,000 episodes. It's an incredible show. I've been on a few times. Pete and his crew have been on my show. They're doing incredible things. Can I say that too much? They are doing incredible things. Seriously. I'd like to welcome James Rosebush to the show today. Now, Pete and crew, take it away.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Cruz.
This is Bryce Vine.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
Is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Daryl Amy.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, this is Rufus McGaugh, and you are watching the Break It Down show.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yes, you are. And so, look, we get a lot of people on the show, Rufus, from all sorts of walks of life. We've had on congressional members, Pulitzer Prize winners, Nobel Peace Prize winners. We've had all kinds of people that are extremely accomplished in terms of those kind of professional things. But you're extremely accomplished in life. I mean, you were just kind of chatting with me about the things you've done. And I guess most notably, you've been to every country on the planet. And if nothing else is interesting, that sure as heck is. What gave you, what or who or why did you take on that quest?
Well, when I give book talks now, because I have 2 books out, and I've been doing this since 2017, I often tell people it's probably 3 things that drove me to do this. The first one was my first social studies class at St. Leonard's Elementary School in Warren, Michigan. When I had that class and had a world history class, as I thumbed through that book that night when I took it home and saw the Great Wall of China and saw the Great Pyramids of Egypt, I knew someday, somehow I wanted to do that. The second thing that got me going on it was the all-American road trip when I finally made it my first year out of high school. And that caused the addiction to travel, if you want to call it that. And I had a blast with two buddies from my old elementary school, St. Leonard's. And we probably made every stupid mistake you could make in travel, but that's how you learn. And we came back sunburned and poison ivy and half starving, but we loved every minute of it. And then
Of course.
those were two positives.
Yeah.
The third one was kind of a negative. I was a Marine grunt during the Vietnam War. I watched and saw some of my fellow Marines get killed and wounded and maimed and so forth. And for whatever reason, I came up with the idea that if you had a goal in life or you wanted to do something, especially the fun things, don't put it off because life is so fleeting.
Yeah, and actually, that's sort of a good little segue into my next question. So you started this quest obviously a long time ago. How many countries that you've been to no longer exist?
uh, it's more going the opposite way. How many new countries are
Okay,
there with the breakup of the Soviet Union, the
sure.
breakup of the old Yugoslavia, and so forth? I often joke, but it is true. I keep a list, and I've got 258 countries and lands on that list. And a lot of people, really the smart ones or the smart Alex, like to point out, hey, there's only 193 UN countries. But you noticed I said countries and lands.
Yeah.
So my goal was not a silly goal just to be checking off countries. It was to see all the great beauty and all the interesting and wonderful things on Earth. So I spent time, money, and energy going to places like Antarctica, which is not a country, big
Right.
continent,
Yeah.
Greenland, which belongs to Denmark. So yeah, I sat home with the breakup of the Soviet Union with a map, uh, crossing out USSR. That was a loss of one, but I ended up with about 6 or 7 republics like Ukraine, Belarus, and Uzbekistan and so forth, which I had been to.
No, that's the. Did you get to Rhodesia before Rhodesia stopped being Rhodesia, or any other of the Southern Africa reconstituted countries?
Well, take care of that phone. I am so happy you asked that question because that's one of my great stories that I told in the classroom for many, many years and is in the book. I got there when it was Zimbabwe, and I mean just there when it became Zimbabwe.
Okay.
And the reason I mention that is that my first day of a 2.5 month trip, I'm wandering around and I get arrested by the new police force, which is all black now, and it's Zimbabwe, not Rhodesia any longer. I'm not taken to a jail. I'm taken to the central prison. I'm put in solitary confinement, having no idea what I've done wrong or what the problem is. And you can only imagine my shock when about, I don't know, 12 or 15 agents walked in armed. And the first question that they asked me was, why did you blow up the Air Force of Zimbabwe? So even this Irish American that has a gift for gab stuttered a bit there on trying to answer that one.
I bet. What other harrowing tales? Like, where else have you been? Like, no shit, there I was in Russia on the train, and then something crazy happened. What else is out there like that?
Well, I might maybe set a record for twice getting arrested in one country in one day. In the old Soviet Union, when I was there, I was in the old Soviet Union twice, and then 3 times since it's been Russia. I was with a group to begin with, and the whole group was detained. We weren't thrown in jail or anything for taking pictures of a top secret area, a fruit market. That's how paranoid or wacko they were at that time. And then very late that afternoon, just wandering around by myself, I was detained by a Soviet policeman for photography, this time in a city park. So it has to be a special somebody, I often joke, where you can not only get arrested once, but twice in the same day in the same country on that. So I had another kind of harrowing experience. It's funny for everybody that hears it, perhaps not so funny for me, but when I went into so-called retirement 11 years ago, and I say so-called retirement because I'm often working in my school system in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, I planned a big trip to Africa in a mopping up operation. I was going to Somalia. And oh my God, my family and my friends were having a heart attack. Everybody thinks of Mogadishu with Black Hawk Down, the pirates, the Civil War. the fratricidal war that they had going on. And I assured everybody that my British travel agent, who was an expert in this region, had planned it out so that it would be very safe. And what we did is kind of a scam. I flew into Somaliland. It's a northern region. It's a breakaway region. Quite frankly, it is very safe. So I kept telling everybody, including my family, who worried the most about me, I'm not going anywhere near Mogadishu because, they're thinking of the bodies of American soldiers being dragged through the streets, the fighting, and so forth. Well, I made my trip into Somaliland. It was wonderful. It was great. Saw some great sights. It was time to go. I hopped on an old Aeroflot, Russian Aeroflot plane to fly to Kenya south. And I couldn't have been on that plane for more than 20 seconds when the pilot came over the intercom and said, I want all passengers' attention. We're making an unexpected, unplanned landing in Mogadishu. And I thought, well, this ought to be interesting. And I'll never forget the next two sentences that came out of his mouth. And that is, he said, if you are a departing passenger and getting off in Mogadishu, when the plane lands, do it quickly. If you're not getting off in Mogadishu, do not stand in a doorway making yourself a target. So it just kept getting better. And then as we started, it's a land route, of course, from Somaliland to Mogadishu. But as we started to come into Mogadishu, you could see ground fire coming up. So the plane swung out over the ocean and came in on a water route, if you would. I shouldn't laugh because it was horrifying for the people that were involved in it, but I never saw people get off of a plane so fast in my life. When that last foot hit the landing asphalt that we landed on there, that plane had left its propellers running. It was a propeller plane, and off we went. So those are some of the stories you get when you travel like I do.
Yeah. It's interesting because when you get around the world and you realize just how crazy the world is. But let me tell us a war story just because you'll appreciate this.
Sure.
I was on a Chinook, which for people don't know, that's the one with the two rotors up top, and then it's got a big barn door that drops down, and you can put a whole crap load of people and stuff on a Chinook. And so there's a gunner that sits on the ramp and points out backwards and then shoots at things that shoot up at you. And it was so cool because it was nighttime and he's shooting down. And I was like, this is the coolest thing because you're on a helicopter, you're at night, you got a gunner shooting, you can see tracers, you see the other Chinook because you always fly in twos. He's shooting down. And then I saw the tracers coming up. And I was like, this is less fun now. This is not as cool.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because you just mentioned my most unfavorite thing to do, and that is flying in a chopper in a hot LZ, a hot landing zone. That's how I got shot up. I got wounded in December of 1970 in Vietnam. We were attempting to make we were on a rescue mission for a 5-man Marine recon unit. And although I got shot up somewhat seriously, to this day, I have no grudges about it. We got all 5 men out. Nobody was hurt except 3 of the people like myself coming in for the rescue. So no hard feelings about that whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, and you get a Purple Heart and you get to be a distinguished veteran at some point. So that's.
I guess so.
Yeah.
People, though, forget it. I have that in my writings, though. It looks good. It makes for a good story, and you get the Purple Heart and so forth. But many of those wounds that people don't see are a lifetime of pain and disability that, people look at me and say, hey, you're doing fine. I've had a series of operations since I've come home. They say, but you look so physically fit. You're a mountain climber and you run and you do this, you do that. But yeah, they don't see it all.
Right. Yeah. And you do it in spite of those things. Like you're like, yeah, I'm going to get those things done. But, I get up my first 3 or 4 steps, my hips, they don't want to move, Yeah. And when I swim, I have to swim in a certain way so that I can take care of my body because of combat, it doesn't work right anymore. Let's not get on that though. Let's talk a little bit about one of the things that folks like us that have been to a lot of places. I've not been to 200 plus countries, but I've been to enough, and I've been to enough conflict zones that when folks complain about the U.S., and this is not a political statement, But when folks complain about the U.S., I'm like, you ought to travel a little bit and go to a place and realize I turned on the faucet today, right? And I thought, man, I have clean water coming out of my faucet, and I don't have to worry about every drop of it. And I love to talk about this. This is how decadent we are, Rufus, right? We poop into potable water. Flush it, forget about it, never think about that waste again. Never think about it for 1 second. That's how fortunate we are. What are your thoughts on what the U.S. is versus what people here think it is?
Well, I think there's a big perception problem with American people and how they're looked upon. I think because it makes the news every time there's some riot or anti-American demonstration or a burning of a flag, they get it into their head that the whole world, or even if they're a little brighter and think it out a little more, that whole country hates America. Even in many countries where a demonstration burns American flag, those people don't speak for everybody in that country. And even some of those people, as hard as it is for us as Americans to see, somebody burning an American flag, even they are just making a political statement and showing how dissatisfied they are with some action that America's taken. You could walk up to some, not all, but some of those same people and tell them you're an American, and they would take you out for a meal or have a discussion with you or whatever. It's just that they're upset about something. You think about it. How many times have any of us ever seen anybody in the world burning an American flag? It just doesn't happen that often. Surprisingly, maybe everybody won't believe me, but we are a popular people, in my opinion, for a number of things because of the great government we have compared to what most people have. And then the second thing that you mentioned, I thought of that same thing, and I did my whole teaching career without ever using a book. I used the photo slides that I had to teach with. And I would do that same thing with water. I would show kids in my students in the classroom in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. I'd say, same thing. The water we have in our toilet is cleaner than what these people are trying to drink and cook with.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, this is not a political statement, but recently I had a person say we're a laughing stock across the world because Donald Trump is our president. And I'm just like, no, we're not. I mean, I've had my times when I've not been well received, in part because I was an American, but that is not the norm. Not from my experience. You've been to a lot more places than me, but I've always found that if you are a good, if you're a good guest, even if you're an American and you're loud and over the top and everything else, people are interested in what's going on. That you've come to their place. They're wonderful towards Americans, in part Australians too, because we get out and we go to places like Zimbabwe. Hey, we heard you guys we're under new management here. I'd love to come visit. And for the most part, most places you're going to get this warm welcome because America has a pretty good reputation around the world.
I agree with that 100%.
Okay, good.
That again, and you know what? You go to any country and say something nice about, I don't know, their city, their land, their hospitality, and these people just can't do enough for you. In most cases, like yourself, yes, I have with all the traveling that I've done. Yes, I've had some circumstances where people were rude or showed their dislike for me just because of the geographic place I was born, United States of America. But in my opinion, that's the exception to the rule.
Yeah, I agree with you. That exception is in no way indicative of what people think. And maybe they don't like Donald Trump. But when I've talked to like Iraqis, Afghans, Egyptians, they all like, oh, I wish I could move there. If I had enough money, I would go because you can be anything you want to be. Here, I can only be X, Y, Z, whatever it is. And they think about it as a real land of opportunity. What else have you learned in terms of perspective and life enriching things to give you the idea of, just what it truly is like for folks in other places when they, just how has your mind been changed through all this traveling?
I think there's two things, and I tried to share that with my middle school students, is they have no idea how good we have it here. That's the first thing. And sometimes their parents teach them that too. But the second thing is, I've always found, and obviously traveled to a lot of poor third world countries. So I'm not trying, the easy comparison is the United States to Germany or France or that. Those are the easy ones. Let's compare it to sub-Saharan Africa or the poorest countries in Southeast Asia. And I have found that when I do have the opportunity to stick around someplace a little longer than usual and just not take in the main sites, but get to know a person or two and have a dinner with them or a drink with them or a coffee, that I find that in every single country in the world, we have more in common with each other than we have differences. Depending on what age when I was traveling, certainly I see it more now as a married man. I got married late. I didn't get married till I was 44, but I had 2 kids now and so forth. That the goals are fundamental. That people want a decent home, they want food for their family, and they want an education. And to put it bluntly, this isn't worded the best way. They want to be left alone. They want to be hassled by a government, a bureaucracy, or anything else. They just want to live their life.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? This is, I think this is a really good conversation. And just to confirm what you said, I've experienced the same thing. And I had the opportunity to go out and talk to locals in the most dangerous places in the world. And I too built a list of common denominators, and they are very similar to yours. And what I try to explain to people, like, I went from Iraq to Afghanistan, and I had a bunch of my peers telling me, oh, they're totally different places. Are they? I don't think so. Like, we're approaching it with the same playbook. They're going to all hate cancer. They don't mind. They'll bear a burden for themselves as long as their kids are having a better opportunity.
Exactly. Exactly.
And you're right. I don't want the government on my back. If they're going to help, great. Otherwise, leave me the hell alone. I've got enough crap to deal with. I mean, that's universal. If that's a farmer in the Central Valley of California, where I'm from, or it's a farmer in a valley in Afghanistan who's growing pomegranates. If you're here to help, great. Here's the help I need. Let me know when you're ready to start bending your back. Don't bring them a solution to a problem that they don't have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you've written a couple of books. Let's talk about these books.
Okay.
Okay, and on the if you're watching, that's the link to go to get to Rufus's books on the account. The first one is Longitude and Latitude with Attitude: One Man's Quest to See the Entire World. Let's talk about that book.
Okay, well, that book came out because even before I completed my goal to visit every country in the world, especially my students, and as they got older, high school, college, got married themselves, and from friends and family who had listened to my stories and heard them in the classroom and outside the classroom say, oh my God, you got more than a book. You've got to, instead of just verbally telling these stories, you've got to write the book. And I ran into 2 problems. One, I had never written a book before, and I was wise enough to know that it was going to be an endeavor if I tried to do it. And the next thing was I had a hard time. I had tried writing short articles in the past, and I could never get what you call voice. I think I'm quite the comedian and quite comical and so forth, but I could never get that through on the written page. And then 2 things finally kind of gelled together to happen. Number one, luckily enough, my neighbor across the street, Anthony Abreu, was an editor, a real editor. And he said, I'll do the editing if you just do your part. And the second thing was that, now at my age and moving into the computer era and so forth, what I had started doing in the last 15 years was writing an email home every night to my family and friends of, what I did, what was going on. And I tried to make it entertaining. And I would have an image of my boys or my wife or one of my good friends. And it was like I tried to write like I would tell them, and I'd get a laugh over a beer or a cup of coffee. And by golly, it worked. And the next thing I knew is that I had all kinds of friends and relatives and strangers sending me an email saying, hey, I understand when you travel, you write these little blogs or you write these little emails or whatever. My friend's been sharing it with me. Would you put me on the list? Well, when that got well over 500 and then into 800 and 1,000, even as dense as I can be sometimes, the light bulb went on. Oh my God, people are willing to read what I write. And so I wrote that first book. It did quite well in sales. It got excellent reviews. It's a 5-star must read on Amazon. For a rank amateur, I couldn't have been happier on that one. And of course, the worst thing you could ever do to an amateur is encourage them. So then I had to get the second book out, which is, and went even a little further with the humor aspect in it.
Well, let's talk about the second book then.
Okay, well, the title of it is Joyriding with a Terrorist in Yemen, and it's actually based on a true story that took place when I went to Yemen, one of the more dangerous places in the world. And again, I tried to write what a lot of people thought was a crazy story loaded with opportunities to get myself killed or kidnapped.
Right.
I wrote it in a humorous manner, and people really enjoyed that story and some of the other ones that I had in there. But yeah, my driver was quite the character. I joke, even though it's not really funny, because Al Qaeda and ISIS are an enemy of the United States and will pick any opportunity to knock off an American or behead them. But I really think my driver probably ended up after I left with Al Qaeda or ISIS or both.
Let me ask you a little bit about perspective, because you've been to a lot of different places, Timor-Leste to Israel, right?
Right, exactly.
They're all Asian countries in between there. How different is Timor-Leste than, say, Israel? And what strikes you about what's the same? I mean, it's one thing to say that they're all Asian, but the actual application of that is I mean, Timor-Leste is closer to, I think, Australia than it is to Vietnam. I think it's way over there.
Yeah, it would be. Well, you know what? I just got through saying that I saw the universality of all humankind, no matter where I went. But here's why I traveled and why I went to every country in the world. Now, when you start talking about culture and geography, if you throw in historic sites, now we're into a whole different ballgame, because every single country, I would have to say, on this planet was very unique and very different from each other. Again, I call it East Timor, but whatever we call it, East Timor and Israel, oh my goodness, the difference in history and the culture and geography. And then if you're a photographer like me and you're majored in history, it just makes it all that much better. So the joy in traveling for me, believe me, it was a very difficult thing to do. Let's forget the amount of money that I spent doing it, just the ruggedness. And doing this on a teacher's salary, I skipped meals and slept on buses and bus stations, city parks, and everything else that you can think. But I didn't go through that so I could have a nice long list to brag about. But I was never disappointed in any new country I went to of seeing new sights. And then I'm a photographer, so that was just the icing on the cake.
Yeah.
So that is the thing that really kept me going, because I often joke, this quest to see every country in the world, it only took me 49 and a half years to do it. And I wasn't traveling in high style, believe me.
Yeah.
I write a lot about that in my book, the food I ate. I've eaten everything from snake to monkey to dog. I stayed in a hotel once in French Guiana in South America. It only had 3 walls. The third wall had been demolished on it. And, I could write a third or fourth book on just the unusual, the terrible, and the crummy places that I've stayed at in this quest.
I once ran across a lady in Iraq. She had a 2-wall house, a cow, a couple of chickens, and some leaves for a roof. And not, when I say a roof, not really. And had no ability to extract herself from that situation. Her husband had been killed, so she now belonged to her brother-in-law. And because she was a woman by herself, of course, the only thing she could be, whether true or not, was a whore. And so, like, she had acquired some chickens, she had acquired some, a cow, and she was just eking out an existence, literally a 2-wall house, like the rest of the house. She had the corner of someone's former home. And when you see that kind of stuff, it's like, oh my God, Well, again, what are we complaining about here? Like, that's as poor as you can be. And she had chickens, so she was lucky. She could at least feed herself, and have milk
Yeah.
that cow and get something to sell in the market. But everybody looked down on her. The brother-in-law didn't, he looked at her as like a burden, not even a human. It was terrible. 50 years to get to 250 countries. I'm rounding my numbers just for simple sake.
Right.
And
That's
look, Micronesia, that ain't easy, man. Tuvalu, Truk, all of that. Saipan.
Yeah.
How did you manage the Micronesia, Polynesia aspect of that? Because you got to get to 5 countries a year on average, and so you have to bunch those far ones together.
You know what? I saved those till last. In fact, I'll kind of tie 2 stories together here. When I went into so-called retirement 11 years ago, in my classroom for all the years I taught, which was around 37, my students used to look at a list of all the countries I've been to. And of course, it was an expanding list from each summer, each Christmas, each sort of vacation that I traveled. And they would look at it as they'd come in during passing time and ask questions about it, or ask me if it was worth going there someday when they started traveling, or they'd see a weird name and, like I've never heard of Same and Principe and so forth. That didn't even know what it was. It's a little island country off the coast of Africa. But at any rate, when I had to take all my stuff home when I went into so-called retirement, I decided to make another list. And that was a list of the countries I hadn't been to. And I want to say I was 62 when I retired. And so what I did is the list started off as about 42, 44 countries. And I said, I'm only 62. I'm in great shape. I'm practically going to be making a few extra bucks in retirement than when I was working, oddly enough. I think this is doable. And so what I did is I then took that list of 42 or 44 countries and I divided it up into 3. The first list of places were those that were physically demanding that I wanted to do. I do a lot of mountain trekking and some mountain climbing. So the first 2 on that list for physically demanding were Antarctica and Mount Everest in Nepal.
Sure.
And I don't know if you've noticed, but even during this program, I'm not getting any younger. So I figured I'm going to start on the physical difficult ones first.
Good approach.
And what's so difficult about Antarctica? I'll tell you what's so difficult about Antarctica. One day, the wind chill factor was 72 below zero. And I'm a guy that would rather be in Jamaica than Antarctica. But anyway, that's what was difficult about that. And then I did a climb of Mount Everest. I didn't have the time or the money to make it to the top. I knew that right from the get-go. But I had done a lot of mountain climbing in my day. And somehow I had missed the big one, and I decided to climb to base, and I did that. So I had those out of the way. The second list of countries, I titled it, just in case my wife were to see the list, politically difficult countries. And when I would use that term among my former students who are now in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, they would interrupt and say, politically difficult, I know you as my teacher. You mean the places you're going to go and probably get yourself killed, right? Yeah. I said, well, yeah, you could put it that way, but I'll continue calling them politically difficult, whether it be North Korea, Cuba, Iraq, which I did, Somalia, which I mentioned earlier. And I'm glad you asked that question about Polynesia and so forth, and all those countries out there, and Micronesia, Melanesia, and so forth. I put those countries at the very last because, hey, again, I'm not a rich man. I'm living first on a teacher's salary, now a teacher's pension and Social Security. I decided that if any point along the line it looked like I was not going to be able to do every country in the world, what's the point of saying I've been to every country but 2? I might as well make it 7 or 8 because, as you probably know, the airfare getting to and then trying to travel around in Micronesia and so forth is just phenomenal. Well, as it turned out, it looked like I was going to be able to make it to every country. And I ended up doing Micronesia. You know what? I won't even mention what it cost me on airfare on this podcast because my wife somehow might hear of it, and I'll be sleeping on your couch down in the basement.
I got a couch right here in the tent, right over here.
Okay. Or I'll be sleeping out on the street if she ever finds out what I spent on just the airfare of trying to move around to Tuvalu and New Caledonia and places like that.
Yeah. people don't understand just how hard it is. Matter of fact, this is a good story. So I'm in Iraq, and a guy is going to go on leave. Right, everybody gets a leave in the middle of your tour. It's an hour. It's a year long, and so and he's just a young kid, like a E3. He's been in the Army. You know, I mean, the deployment is like his longest thing he's ever done in the Army at this point. And so he was from Peleliu, and he had to go, and he had to fly for days. Oh no, it wasn't. It wasn't that. He was from I can't think of it. Anyhow, way out there, and so he had to get to Hawaii. Already a long flight. Then from Hawaii, somewhere like Guam, and then from somewhere like Guam to somewhere else. It took him literally like a week to get there, but your leave doesn't start until you get there. And so he did all that, was there for his 15 days or whatever he got, and then started coming back. Well, the first sergeant was like, this guy's AWOL. We're going to start up paper on him because he's not come back. And I happened to hear him say that. And I said, are you talking about, and I have nothing to do with this kid. We just happened to have this conversation. And he's like, yeah, that's the kid. Yeah, he's not here. I'm like, hey, he lives in this country. He said he was going to go and had no idea how long it would take him to get there. I bet he's just en route. And he's like, how long is it? It doesn't take 4. I'm like, it might take 5-6 days. I don't know, because it's so far out there. But just to make your point for you, you know, like if you miss the one boat for the day that goes to truck or some other place, you missed it.
Right.
And the logistics in that part of the world are expensive, and you can only go as fast as you can go, so you can't be in a rush, you know. So that's why I asked about the Nijas, because it's out there. What about like the far off islands like Christmas, Pitcairn, Easter?
I have not done those. You know, if one were to make the mistake of saying, I want to visit every island in the world, that would be a huge mistake because there's just too many. I mean, like Indonesia has 14,000 islands, and the Philippines has something like 11 or 12,000 islands.
Right.
So I never made that mistake or was so naive to try to do that. Yeah, you know, what I tried to do was distinctive geographic regions in the United States. So that's why I went to anything that was a UN country, but I went to Antarctica. I've been north of the Arctic Circle. I've gone back to many different, some countries, you know, a number of times, like Russia 5 times, twice when it was communist, and then 3 times since it's been whatever you want to call it now. Yeah. I don't want to say free, but independent and at least not communist. So the whole idea were to see the sites, geographic, historic, and cultural. So yeah, there's just no way I'm ever going to, even if I get another lifetime, I don't think I'm going to be able to do, you know, every single island that's out there.
What about South Sudan? They're the newest UN country.
Yeah. You know what? I'm one of the few guys in the world, or few human beings, that probably praise to God each night that there's not another country that breaks away or secedes or whatever, because it's going to cost me time and money. Yeah. And I'm not sure what I'll do at this point if new countries start to come about. I may go and visit them. I may not. You know, I did it once. I did every country and land in the world once. Yeah. I may go back. I may not, but I'm not really worried about it. But you mentioned South Sudan. Yeah, that was a country. Luckily, I had a few more that I had to do that I hadn't quite finished in Africa. Unfortunately, they were over on the west side of the continent, so that meant, you know, more airfare again. Right. After I finished those, went into South Sudan.
How crazy huge is Africa when you realize like it doesn't look as big as it really is on the map?
Yeah, you're right on that. And you know what? I was a novice at it. I often tell people when I give book talks, you know, I'm a guy that was born in 1949, so I went to school in the 1950s and the early 60s. In the lower, very, very low middle class neighborhood that I lived in, the city I lived in, Warren, Michigan, there was not one human being that I knew that had ever traveled. Not only not overseas, that was almost unthinkable. I never knew anybody in my family, my teachers, friends, or neighbors who had ever made what I would call a vacation trip or recreational trip. Sometimes they might drive to West Virginia or Tennessee to visit the family from where they came, but nobody traveled. So when I started this little venture, I really didn't know what I was getting into. And then added to it to kind of confuse and show how naive I was, like a lot of people, after I got out of the service, my first trip was to Europe. So I went with two friends. You know, you put your backpack on and you've got your Eurail pass and you've got your hostel card. And oh my God, let's face it, the European transportation system is next to none in the world. It's something I wish my own country would emulate, especially with the trains and the trolleys and so forth. So it was so easy. And of course, I was basically doing Western Europe because most of communist Europe was either you couldn't get in or it was very difficult. And I left after that trip thinking, well, this is a piece of cake, traveling through Belgium and the Netherlands. And so I thought I could do the same thing in Africa. But we're talking the 1960s and the 1970s, when those countries, fresh out of colonialism, were in worse shape than what they are today, which is hard to believe. And oh my goodness, I saw my first trip to Africa. I had a real rude awakening to see how difficult this was going to be to try to travel through these countries. And then, the safari countries, if you would. Again, a lot of people make the mistake. That was my first one, Kenya. Well, they have an infrastructure, if you would, for tourists to get you out to those national parks to see the animals. Again, I mistakenly thought, well, this is rough. It's a hell of a lot harder than traveling through, Spain and Portugal, but, it's doable. But then I started getting into Central and West Africa. And, if a four-wheeled vehicle went through the town or the city, people stopped and looked, back at that time, because it was just so that far backwards compared to the rest of the world. So, yeah, it was tough, no doubt about it.
Yeah. It's funny when you think about how hard it is to get, because you're right, in Western Europe specifically, bing, 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 just clicking around, no big deal. And maybe someone checks your passport and gives you a cross eye, but other than that, you're going to float through.
Exactly.
We did a trip, a Christmas trip, and we went to Hungary, which I wouldn't include in part of West Europe. And we got warned on our way in, like, hey, there's a good chance there's going to be a transportation strike. And so wherever you're planning to go, plan some extra time because you're not going to be in control of when you get there. And we're like, well, we have a train thing. They're like, yeah, it doesn't matter. If you're on the train and the strike happens, you're going to be off the train wherever you're at. And then you're going to have to wait for something else. And sure enough, we get there and they're like, that train you thought you were on that you paid money for? Nope, ain't happening. And you're like, well, how do we get to where we got to get to? Like you all too many of you get on this bus and it's not leaving for 12 hours. And so you just, and the thing is if you dared to leave and like go do something else, you lost your spot in the line and there was no guarantee you would get on that bus. And it was the only bus that day. And so we sat there in the train bus station all day long and just barely got the entire family on that bus, And so, I mean, we probably would have rented a car or whatever, but again, everybody had to make contingencies. So if you don't make it on that bus and you wait too long on the bus, you don't get the car, it just gets crazy real fast. And that is the norm in, I don't know, what would you say, 65% of the world, 80% of the world, where your travel plans are secondary to what is going on there.
Well, if you think things can go wrong on an American train or the European train system, which is wonderful, especially with a strike or something like that, just start trying to use African trains. There's not a lot of them, but you start using those. I write a very humorous story that took place, probably in the late 1970s. And I was traveling through West Africa. And I met an American who worked for Kodak from the United States. And he assisted me quite a bit. I spent some time, a couple nights sleeping on his couch. He was stationed in the Ivory Coast. But I was hot to get into a very difficult country to get into, Upper Volta, which is now, and they had just changed the name to Burkina Faso. And I look for any excuse in the world to mention that country, just because it's so fun to say their capital city, Ouagadougou. It sounds like something you'd say when you're 2 years old in your high chair or whatever. Yeah. So he helped arrange the train trip for me from the Ivory Coast, from Abidjan, to get into Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, which, by the way, Burkina Faso means land of honest and upright men. And just between you and me, I've never met so many crooks in my whole life. So that's a real misnomer on that one. So I get on. Let's talk about a misnomer. The name of the train, because of they were French colonies, most of these lands here, was called La Gazelle. Now, any normal person who knows their animals pretty well, I would think the first thing you think of with a gazelle is a really fast animal. And my comment is La Gazelle train was the most crippled and wounded gazelle that there was in Africa. I don't think we ever got over 3 miles per hour. But the most amazing thing on that, okay, you're on a train going through the desert at 2 to 3 miles an hour. I think sometimes down to 1, but anyway, we'll go with 2 or 3. And I can't believe it. 2 trains in front of us had a head-on collision.
Oh my God.
Now, how in the hell, going at 2 or 3 miles an hour, you can run into each other? The only good news about it is at that speed, nobody gets hurt. Right. Okay, you're going too slow. But it had derailed both those other trains, and it took the crew of the 3 trains to get the other cars off the track somehow. I don't know how they did it to this day. But the solution now I was on this La Gazelle that was pretty cramped to begin with.
Right.
And the solution, you can probably see where this is going.
I do.
Is to put all the passengers on the other 2 trains onto my train. Now, if you want a visual of what this looks like, run to your local supermarket, get a can of sardines, open it up, and you'll know what it was like for poor old Rufus to be on that train there with the passengers of 2 other trains. It was just amazing. And it continued limping along to get us into Ouagadougou.
That is a great story. Yeah, and that is exactly how it goes. And yeah, just the regular rules don't apply. And then you have to go to the bathroom, and you're like, what am I going to do? They're not going to stop. There is no bathroom or, I mean,
get by the door and take a whiz. That's all you can do. I don't know what the ladies do, but
yeah, they get by the door, they take a whiz.
Yeah, there you go. So
what countries can you not get enough of? I mean, obviously you've been everywhere and I'm positive you love all of them, but which ones you're like, I could continue to go back to whatever Greece? Like what's your home away from home?
Once this crazy pandemic is over with, there's 2 places I feel I can't get enough of, Switzerland and Western USA. A lot of people at my book talks, they throw me a real curveball, and I know what's coming because I've done enough book talks now. So sometimes I beat them to the punch. Everybody wants to ask me, what's my favorite country? And I go, well, there's 3 answers. 2 of them you're not going to like, and 1 you will like. The first answer you won't like is that I have been to so many beautiful countries and regions. It's impossible unless I keep you here for days telling you about all the beautiful places in the world. Of course, nobody wants to hear a stupid answer like that. So I say, okay, I'll give my second choice, actually number 1 favorite places, but I don't plan on going to it, is 23 and a half years ago, my wife and I made a journey to Russia to adopt a little 6-month-old baby boy. And so that has got to my son, Eric, who helped me set all this new technology up to talk to you and your listeners today. And we won the lottery when we got that kid. He's 24 years old now. So, yeah. And of course, that's a personal story. Nobody wants to hear that one really either, although it's a big chapter in my first book, Longitude and Latitude with Attitude, for this reason. Again, I'm not going to be writing sentimental stories that are dear to my heart for people who want, some good travel stories or good funny stories. But I tell you, forget my wife and her travel experience, but even with the guy that's been everywhere, I had more weird, unusual, strange things take place on that trip of about 10 days to adopt my oldest boy, Eric. And I won't go into all of it because it's a big chapter in the book, but perhaps one of the funniest and strangest things that I've ever done in my life was that we were given orders, warnings, advice before we went over, and adoption's $20,000. To do your adoption, back when we did this 23 years ago, Russia, like a lot of new countries that was exiting communism, is what you call a cash society. They didn't want their own money, the ruble, that was worth nothing. They were not set up for traveler's checks or credit cards. What did they want? They wanted the best damn currency in the world. That's called the American dollar.
Yeah.
Well, my first problem was in there are a few other countries like this, but at that time, when they say they want the U.S. dollar, it's not any kind of dollar. They want brand new $100 bills that are no more than 2 or 3 years old in perfect shape. Well, I can't begin to tell you what my journey was like before we left, hitting every bank and credit union around, because the first thing we had to do is make sure they looked nice. And the second thing was I'd never bothered on the folding currency that I had to look at the date on it. And we had to have something that was no more than 2 or 3 years old.
Right.
But the best part of that story is I'm walking around with more cash on my body than I've ever carried before in my life. Now, I've been in a lot of dangerous places, and I've been in a lot of places that quote are not dangerous, but the crime rate is high. So you got to be careful, not only for your personal security, but for people. They might necessarily not harm you. They might stick a gun in your face, but they get your money and you can always replace money. But I'm carrying $20,000. I mean, I worked a couple of years of my work career where I didn't make that much. And it's all in brand new $100 bills, okay? And the worst part is that when you land, as we did in Saratov, Russia, every crook, every criminal knows that the Japanese businessman, the American businessman, or somebody like me coming in for adoption is loaded with cash. And boy, we had to walk by some really scary looking characters, my wife and I. Well, anyway, the main story I wanted to tell you was here I am with $20,000. I've made it to the apartment that we're going to stay at. We're going through the bureaucracy of both Russia and what was left of the old Soviet Union and a Russian orphanage. And the day came when our guide, who was kind of guiding us around, said, today you make money transactions. So that means I'm going to depart with the most important thing in my life. No, not my family, my money. But I'm just joking, of course. But so we get into a little Russian Lada. We go into Saratov, which is a big city. It reminded me a lot of Detroit from where I'm from, big industrial city. And I sit in the back of one with my wife, in one of these junky Ladas that we used to laugh at in the old days about, they had a rubber band for a motor, a wind-up key in the back.
Yeah.
We've got two bodyguards, and the crowds just move away from us. The woman, and we're sitting in a car, and nothing's happening. And I ask our guide, Sasha, I said, what are we doing? He says, well, we are waiting for a woman to make money transaction. We're talking $20,000. I go, who is this woman? She does not like to give her name out. I about jumped through the roof of that car. I'm going to give $20,000 to some Russian woman who doesn't like to give her name out?
Yes.
Well, I pushed it, and I wasn't happy because her name was Sasha. The reason I wasn't happy about that is my driver and the other bodyguard, their name's Sasha too. It's like, what the hell? Is everybody in this country named Sasha?
Yes.
I'll never forget this as long as I live. I thought we were going to go into one of the office buildings. Sasha comes out. She's a very overweight woman, gets in this little Lada, and I turn over, well, 17,000 of it. I needed 3,000 for the orphanage. $17,000 that I had on my money vest, on my chest, in my shoes, in my pockets, in my underwear, in the back seat of a Lada. $17,000 straight changes hands. The whole time I'm thinking, this is the biggest scam in the world. If I ever even do make it to the police, they're going to think I'm an idiot when they say, who stole your money? I'll say, Sasha, Sasha, and Sasha. I might as well say Larry, Moe, and Curly. And, we're supposed to get a baby. And at that point in the back of that Lada, I thought to myself, I didn't want to ruin it for my wife. I said, if we end up with a baby, I'm a monkey's uncle. Yeah. Well, I must be a monkey's uncle because 2 days later, we ended up getting the baby. They didn't do a switch and bait. We got the baby we had seen a crummy black and white video of, but transacting $17,000 for the baby in a backseat of a Lada was a complete new one for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. What country are you like? I've been, it's nice. I don't need to spend my money to go back. What's off the list for future places?
Well, I probably wouldn't go through the misery of doing most West African countries. There's not a whole lot to see there, and it's very difficult with climate and transportation to move around. Um, it sounds like you've had a little experience yourself in Micronesia. A lot of people have the idea of all those South Pacific islands of being as, let's say, as beautiful as Tahiti or Mariah or something like that. As you probably know, they are not. Most of them, they are not really that attractive islands, quite frankly. And it's expensive to get there. So Bora Bora lives up to its reputation. Of course, that's Polynesia and Mariah and so forth. But yeah, most of those islands, I would probably not spend the money to go back.
Yeah, and you could do it in the Caribbean and island to island.
That's exactly what I say.
Yeah.
The Caribbean is America's backyard, if you would.
Right.
And you think of all those beautiful islands out in the Caribbean, St. Bart's, Anguilla, Jamaica, the whole nine yards. There's a zillion of them.
Yeah.
It's so much prettier. And, sometimes if you get lucky and get a direct flight, like once I made a flight from Detroit, I want to say it was only like three and a half hours to the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
Compare that with the horror story you were just telling me of some of those flights that I've been through.
Is nowhere near.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about just the logistics, and then when you get there, you're like, I mean, and to be honest, a lot of the European countries, tell me which one I'm in again. Like they're not all Austria, they're not all Switzerland, so
right.
There's nothing wrong with the Baltics or the Balkans, but there's not enough separation between that and I don't know, whatever. I'm a big fan of microstates too. So I don't know if you have a favorite, but Andorra, San Marino, all of those kind of places.
Yeah, I did all those. They're all on the list. Of course, even before I ever thought that I would be able to see every country in the world on that big Europe trip when I graduated from college with my two buddies. Yeah, we had to do all those too just for the fun of doing it. And you know what? I'll be honest with you. I'm glad I did it. Each one of them was unique and different. It's a good story to talk around a barbecue or a party or whatever, going to them and the experiences that you had. But yeah, I did them. What? Go ahead.
What clicks the thing off the list? Like for me, pretty much, I'm pretty open with it. Like if I go there, I'm there. So like Liechtenstein, what do you have to do to click Liechtenstein off the map? Do you just have to just show up? Do you have to have lunch? Do you have to meet someone? What counts an actual visit for you?
Okay. I'm glad you asked that question also. I'll tell you a little story here, and it's in my first book. When I was in the Marines and in Vietnam, my travel list was 7 countries, and half of those were places that I stopped in the Marine Corps on the way to Vietnam. We made a stop in Wake Island, which isn't even a country, belonged to the United States.
Right.
We made a stop in Okinawa, which that time was U.S. controlled, but has gone back to Japan. So my buddy, you know how guys are, they razz each other to no end. My buddies would introduce me to other Marines and other platoons and companies and say, this is our world traveler. And they would all laugh their asses off at me at my little list because the first one on there was the United States. Well, of course, we'd all been in the United States. And I used to sit there very pontifically and say, well, if I had been a German or a Frenchman and I went to the United States would be on the list. My bad luck was that even though I served with a great group of guys, my bad luck was many of them were from states like Michigan that bordered Canada. So my second country on the list was Canada. And the guys from Vermont, Minnesota, New York weren't giving me any, credit for that one. And then, of course, I had Wake Island and Okinawa. They used to crack up like crazy when I put Republic of South Vietnam because we're all fighting there. They all hated it just like me. But anyway, I had my little list.
Yeah.
Well, right towards the end of my tour of duty, we were just getting ready to go home. And by God, they yanked a bunch of us out to go on a special op right on the border of Laos. And I was going to be the machine gunner. I served as a machine gunner when I was in the Marines. So we go out on this patrol the first day. And, I'm a history major and I taught social studies. And the first day's patrol that we went on, we passed by Khe Sanh. Now, to the Marines, that's like Gettysburg and D-Day and Normandy Beach to the Army. Khe Sanh, that 5,000 Marines fought off 25,000 NVA for months there, and it all had been deserted, but it was like a ghost town. I wanted to go over and look at it. But then I found out how many of my fellow Marines were superstitious and actually believing in ghosts and whatever. They wanted no part of it. And there I was, so close to this historic site.
Yeah.
Well, the second day it gets better. I'm on the patrol again. I'm acting as a machine gunner, and the Marines machine gun team of 3 men is always towards the end of a patrol. And we're going through the jungle, and all of a sudden I saw everybody stop. They start to get down. I'm thinking, uh-oh, this isn't looking good. And I'm so short, it's unbelievable going home. I can't believe my rotten luck. I'm going to end up in a firefight, maybe get killed or wounded, when I have only days to go. But the next thing is everybody stands back up. Of course, it's total silence. Nobody talks or makes any noise. And I watch one Marine walk to the man behind him and whisper in his ear. That's what we did. And they keep doing that till it gets close to me. But the weird thing is, they're all smiling. Trust me, my friend, you never smile on a Marine patrol.
Yeah.
And I'm going like, what the hell's going on? Finally, the man in front of me walks back and he whispers into my ear and says, the lieutenant says that Laos is just 20 meters away, about 20, 25 feet. Well, if you had been the coconut on the tree or the butterfly up in the palm tree, what you would have seen instantly is the Marine machine gunner make a left and walk 20 meters over into Laos. And then just to be safe, I went another 5 meters, and I'm standing there with my M60 machine gun on my shoulder. And again, as I joke, even as dense as I am, the first thing was, wow, this is cool. I got another country on my list. And secondly, as I keep looking around, I said, even I noticed, the jungle over here in Laos doesn't really look any different than the jungle over there in Vietnam, just 20, 25 feet away.
Yeah.
And then the third thing that hit my cranium was, you know what? I'm really not seeing a lot of Laos here. I'm just seeing some jungle that looks identical 20, 25 feet away. Well, I would tell that story to my students, and I tell it at barbecues and parties. And every time I would tell it with an adult group, some woman would say, it was always a woman, you don't really count that you've been there, do you? And I would give her an icy look and say, yes, I do. And if you think about it for a minute, nobody worked harder to get to Laos than I did during a war in a Marine patrol. So, I never tried to get silly about it. If I stepped foot in a country, yeah, it went on the list. But like with Laos, 20, 25 years later, I went back and I toured the country and I saw it. I know of a few people, or heard of them at least, that do something as silly as that.
Yeah, I mean, at some point you're there, right? Like you can argue, right. But like at some point you are in Laos, even if it's just 20 feet away.
Right.
I went to Vatican City one time. I never went to St. Peter's Basilica. We literally stepped over the chain, and we're in like I'm in a different country, and then I step back. I mean, I'm going to count it. It's you're there, And if you go to Liechtenstein,
right, exactly.
What are you going to do in Liechtenstein? There's not a lot for you to do. I mean,
there isn't.
It's not a big place. You can have lunch in a cafe. Is that what it is? Did you need to sit down and eat some rations? And be like, now I'm in Laos because I had a meal.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
hey, there's one story I definitely want to share with you and your listeners. For years, my whole teaching career, I did it more as a joke because my students would hear the stories, and most of the good stories, the funny ones, were stories where things didn't work out so well for me. And I'd always tell them, I'm proud of my Irish heritage. I got that Irish gift of gab. And as soon as I tell my students that I'm going to tell them a story, I used to brag that I can talk my way into anything. I can talk my way out of anything. And they'd all laugh because they'd heard many of the stories where sometimes I did talk my way out, but other times things went south like they did in Zimbabwe when I was thrown into a prison. But I think I saved my credentials of the Irish gift of gab when my last country to seal the deal of seeing every country and visiting every country in the world was Libya, which I did in May of 2017. I worked with a local travel agent here who had some connections in the Middle East. He runs a travel agent, E. Habazaki. And we had planned this and had a couple setbacks. A couple times I tried to get in on a small plane from Tunisia. I didn't go as far as Tunisia, but things would flare up and I just couldn't do it. Anyway, finally on the time where I'm going to seal the deal, the scam that we used to get into Libya. This is May of 2017. I flew in on a small plane from Tunisia, went into the Libyan airport to go through formalities of immigration and customs and so forth. And my visa application form with my name on it stated I was a Chinese engineer.
Oh,
well,
okay.
you're looking at me, and and even if you're not looking at me, this Irish American no more looks like a Chinese, and I look like an Ethiopian.
Yeah.
And what I did, this was my last country, and even though I could put it on the list, I wanted to see some things. I was only there 2.5 days, and I saw some good things. I started talking and explaining, and then some more talking, and they finally let me in. Now, as I often joke, it might not be my Irish gift of gab. I have a sneaking suspicion they just got sick of listening to me and said, yeah, you can come on in. But anyway, That's how I sealed the deal.
Yeah, like you kept talking and they all went to dinner. And you're like, well, since you're not here, must be a yes.
I think the more they listened to me, they figured I was figured out I was pretty harmless.
Yeah. Well, so listen, I appreciate you coming on and sharing these stories, man. It's neat to have people go out, and I love the perspective that a world traveler has because you get it. You get how fortunate we are to be here. Just the simple act of a protest here, and the smooth transition of power that we managed to do. Yeah, right now today, we're not sure what's going to happen next, but the God's honest truth is that we're going to have a smooth transition of power, and it's just, it's incredible. We're so fortunate. And even if it is dicier this time than last time or the time before that, again, you can get tacos any day of the week, any time of the day. There's so many things, like you go to Germany on the wrong day, like, oh no, we're closed. You're like, but this is essential.
You mentioned demonstrations. I've actually, because I'm very political, when I travel and I see a demonstration, I'm like an addict. I just can't help myself. I got to walk over to it and check it out and do some photography or whatever. I've been in a couple bad ones. I have one in my book where when I was in Poland during communist times, I was wandering around by myself with my camera, and I saw a large group of people, which struck me as strange to begin with. That it looked like some sort of demonstration.
Yeah.
And what the Polish people were doing, this would have been, I want to say, the late 70s. Simply, it was a very muted demonstration. They knew they could only push so far. This is just when solidarity started,
right,
over in Poland. But anyway, very peaceful. Housewives, working class people. And what they would do is outside of a Catholic church, that was the first little hint. It's like, communism, tried to disrupt and end religion as much as they could. They showed up at their Catholic church and they brought flowers, very peaceful, nothing violent about a flower, for God's sakes.
Right.
But they would lay the flowers on the ground, all the people, there were thousands there. And it just happened to end up being design of a crucifix or a cross. And finally, when the Polish soldiers, all in riot gear, figured it out what they were doing and make it, because the cross would be a symbol of protest, without any warning, just charge these people with rifles, bayonets, billy clubs. Now, it was mostly people getting struck with the butt of rifles or billy clubs. I didn't see anybody shot or bayoneted, but oh my God, this couldn't have been, it were like flower children. Couldn't have been a more peaceful demonstration. And I was running with the rest of them, trying to, I was hanging on for dear life to my camera. I could just see some soldier, smashing my camera or whatever. And all I was doing there was being a observer to the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me, like, we take it for granted that you can take pictures wherever you want. You go to the wrong place and you try to sneak film out, forget it. Yeah. They'll take that from you. I'll take your camera.
Yep.
They do not care. Hey, well, listen, I appreciate it. Everybody should check out your books. There's the link right there, and I'll put it in the show notes if you're listening on the podcast side. Rufus, what a fantastic life, man. I was telling somebody the other day, it's not what you have, it's the life that you live and what you invest in, because ultimately, whenever you do pass on, again, you don't get to take it with you, but those memories, that enrichment that you can provide other people, it's, experience is always going to beat out money.
You must have been spying on me somehow before I've met you, because you're using almost my exact same words. Somebody could come by and say, all the money you spent on travel, I could give you back, but you wouldn't have the memories. One, I wouldn't do it. I'm not a very religious person. I was raised as a Catholic and whatever. But I don't know what happens when you die. But here's my guess. Just like you said, I damn well know you're not going to take your big house or your money with you.
Nope.
I don't care if you believe in reincarnation, heaven, hell, or whatever it is.
Yep.
You're not going to take that with
Nope.
you. But you know what? And I don't know this, but if you can't take anything with you, I'm making a wild guess here. It's memories and love and things like that, your experiences. So yeah, I'm glad I did it.
Yeah. Well, and that gift that you gave to all those kids for all those years in your school, I mean, how many of them took that trip? There are so many Americans that don't even have a passport, and you're saying get out there and go do it. And again, we are so fortunate. We are wealthy enough to take real trips. It's
Right.
just remarkable.
We should be very thankful.